Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kate O'Dell and Kim Strassel. The Senate is negotiating, has been for some time now, weeks really, a border security bill. Really would be the most restrictive border security bill in decades. That would be part of a bill for military aid to Ukraine and Israel and some parts of the Pacific. But the longer this takes, the less likely it seems. And now Republicans are standing up all over the place, particularly Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, who calls the bill he hasn't even seen yet dead on arrival in the House. And Donald Trump says, don't pass it. Bad bill is worse than no bill, even though we don't know that it's good or a bad bill since we haven't seen it. So, Kim, this looks like it's headed down.
Yeah, we've gone from bad to worse on this. And in part, exactly because you said nobody's waiting to see what the product is. At first, Speaker Johnson and a number of members in the House were simply staking their flag, saying, we want the entirety of our own border security bill that we passed last year to be accepted in its entirety in this bill. And we won't accept anything less than that. But they left it open to at least see what's going to come out. Now you have poor Senator James Lankford, who is the Republican in the Senate negotiating this. He's been working on this for weeks. Apparently, they have made some really major breakthroughs on issues like the language of asylum, the standard that is that people would need to hit to come in, parole and the president's ability to use that, i.e. to wave through entire classes of people and grant them temporary status here, the dollars that are going to go down to the border and what precisely they would be used for, security rather than the processing of more and more people. And all of this, I should note, is miles away from what anything the Democratic side was talking about even 2 months ago. And it's a reflection of just how big a political liability the border has become. They are on the run. They are vulnerable. They are essentially giving Republicans much of what they want. And yet, thanks to Donald Trump and some of this rabble-rousing on the right, the new rallying cry is nothing will be good enough, even that thing that we've not seen. It'll never hit our standards, and they're foreclosing the possibility of getting what could be a very big win here.
Let's listen to Senator James Lankford, who's the chief Republican negotiator, talking about the change in a Republican point of view, not himself, but other Republicans over this.
Republicans 4 months ago would not give funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for our southern border because we demanded changes in policy. So we actually locked arms together and said, we're not going to give you money for this. We want a change in law. And now it's interesting, a few months later, when we're finally getting to the end, they're like, oh, just kidding. I actually don't want a change in law because it's a presidential election year. We all have an oath to the Constitution, and we have a commitment to say we're going to do whatever we can to be able to secure the border.
Well, there you have it. James Lankford, who, by the way, is a very conservative member, now being portrayed as a sellout and a rhino for negotiating at all on this, when, in fact, that was the request of Republicans because they feared back in the autumn that even if they supported Ukraine aid, there would be a difficult vote because some elements of the party oppose it. So, we'll put some border security elements on it. And because the politics of immigration and border security have moved so much in their direction, that they are getting, I think, even more policy than they ever anticipated. And yet now, Kate, the bulk of the House for sure, and more senators, and of course Donald Trump, say, don't do it, because I guess that they fear this would help Joe Biden. So the argument is, let's not solve the problem for several more months because somehow Joe Biden might get credit for it. Couldn't you just say maybe we get credit for forcing him to sign it?
Well, yeah, and keep in mind the term rhino now is being wielded by people who hold democratic views on foreign policy, on economics, on spending. I could go on. But I do think another factor here is, well, what happens if the border deal collapses? And the question is, we money for Ukraine, lethal aid go through the Senate. And I think the answer is eventually you will get 60 votes in the Senate to help Ukraine, because the core of the GOP conference understands the stakes in Ukraine and that we should help them. Then, let's play this out a little bit. You would have tremendous pressure on the House to have a vote or essentially just leave Ukraine hanging. The politics of this are terrible for Republicans if they dump a border deal. They have this rare opening where they don't have to make a concession on immigration, like a legal pathway to citizenship that is not popular with the Republican base. All they have to do is give money to Ukraine that about 60% of them support anyway. So do not ask me what the strategy here is, because I think it is not particularly well thought out.
It's a very important point you make here about the trade-offs, because typically when Republicans have entered these negotiations over immigration policy, it has been, we'll trade border security provisions for some kind of legalization, whether it be the so-called dreamers, people brought here as young people illegally who are now adults, or whether it be some other provision that legalizes big chunks of people who are here illegally. And this one, that's off the table. Those are off the table. What we're talking about here are a whole variety of provisions that would just tighten the standards for and the process for border enforcement. And Kim, if they don't get this, let's say they say, sorry, we're not going to take yes for an answer. We'll get better when the next election happens. Donald Trump will be president and we'll get what we want. My own view on this is that there is not a chance that the Democrats will give a Donald Trump presidency the 60 votes he needs in the Senate to pass these kinds of provisions, certainly not without major concessions that involve legalization.
Yeah, what did Hillary Clinton say once? The willing suspension of disbelief. I mean, it's never going to happen. And I think Donald Trump is making a mistake in pushing against this too, and not thinking about the situation he may inherit when he takes over the White House. He is going to own it. At that point, the border will still be broken. It'll be on him to do something. The situation down there is now so bad that many of the executive tools he used the first time around are not going to be enough, and some of them may not be available to him. For instance, it's unclear that the Mexican government will ever agree to a sort of Remain in Mexico program, at least not of the type and size that would be necessary to deal with this problem. He's going to need some help from Congress. Yet at that point, Democrats will have a twofold interest in not helping him. One, they'd like to see him fail. They'd like to be able to say, look, Donald Trump isn't able to handle this any better than Joe Biden was. And because they don't want, in essence, to actually see border controls, and that at least a progressive faction of the Democratic Party likes an open border. So it will have no incentive. He will not have 60 Senate votes to do anything like what people are talking about today.
All right. We shall see where this goes, but it looks like the border security negotiations are on life support. Even if we get legislation drafted coming out of the Senate, we'll see what happens. And then we go to this high stakes vote, we hope, on Ukraine. All right. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Kate. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch, and we're really glad to have you with us. Hope you'll be with us tomorrow. Thanks for listening.